I think you're doing a great job. You should continue. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Thanks for giving me the honor of sitting there while I talk for a little while. Big data is not about the data is the title. But what does that mean? It means that the revolutions that we've been seeing, that we've been hearing the products of, is not the data. That's not what's driving them. What's driving them is the analytics. It's how to take the data and make it actionable. If you're looking for something to do after you graduate, this would be a good field. The analytics, the statistics, the data science. There hasn't been unemployment in this field for generations, and there's unlikely to be any time in the near future. So I would, I'd focus on that. So let me give me some context. I'm a social scientist, so I'm going to talk about the data in big data that focuses on people. In the last 50 years, our focus has been on, our sources of information about people have been about survey research, from aggregate government statistics, and about one-off studies of individual places, people, or events. These are tremendously informative, but they are very limited. Survey research, for example, is samples of isolated people from unknown geographic locations where we ask them a few pop quizzes about things they may or may not have ever thought about before. Aggregate government statistics are from governments that produce useful statistics and from governments that don't. I once tracked down the source of information about the prevalence of AIDS in Africa. And it turned out that the information that was released by the World Health Organization came from the countries, and it went to a guy named Allen in the World Health Organization who changed the numbers from the countries, and he said, this doesn't look right, and he'd cross it off, and he'd write the right one. And you know what? Allen was really good, but still, that's not very empirical. The next 50 years are the kinds of things we've been seeing. Fast increases in these types of data and much more. Shrinking computers, as we've seen, the march of quantification that we are a part of, and I hope you will all join in. It's affecting every area of society. There's a replication movement. So not only is data becoming more available by itself, but academics and companies and governments are sharing them with each other. Governments encourage now data collection, and that's becoming incredibly important. There's advances, as I said, in statistical methods. The result of this has changed most large companies, established entire new industries, altered friendship networks, if you've seen Facebook, changed political campaigns, public health, legal analysis, policing, economics, sports. Have you seen the movie Moneyball? Yeah, okay. There's one person there that saw the movie Moneyball. Public policy. Public policy are gigantic experiments with no control group. Okay, so it turns out we can now influence government enough to run the randomized experiments to learn about whether the public policies actually are having the impact we think that they should have. Literature in almost every area. But the value in these data, as I said, is in the analytics, not just in the data. The data themselves are easy to come by. They're a free byproduct of improvements in every organization. They're becoming commoditized, which means they're becoming cheap. If you ignore it, the organization you're a part of will have more at the end of the year than at the beginning. If your company or your school or your town hall puts in a new financial system or HR system or sprinkler system or air conditioning system, it will come with a little spigot that spews out data. And that comes for free. If you put in a little bit of effort, there'll be even more. But what are you supposed to do with all this data? It actually just makes things harder if you don't know how to do with it. The value, the revolution, the reason we get to be here in this beautiful place is that we now know what to do with the data. It's the analytics. The output can be customized to exactly what it is you care about. Do you know Moore's law? The doubling of computer speed every 18 months or so. It's an empirical generalization. It's a great thing. It's really helped us a lot. But it's absolutely nothing, or it's little, compared to a good data scientist who can take an algorithm and increase it in an afternoon by a factor of 1,000. It's not actually a surprise, it's not even actually that big a deal. Compare the two, there's no contest. There was a colleague at Harvard who was running an analysis every week, and more data was coming in, and he would run the analyses, and finally there was too much data to be able to run it on his computer. And so he put in a request to see how much the new computer he would need to buy would be. And it was $2 million. He would have to spend $2 million on a computer. That's a lot. That's a big grant. You can do it, it's possible, but it's really hard. And so, he's gearing up to try to figure out how to do this. And a couple of graduate students and I got together for 2 hours and figured out an algorithm so that he now runs the same computer, he now runs the same analysis on the much larger amount of data on his laptop in 20 minutes. Okay? This is not even a surprise. It's not like a stroke of brilliance. This is the kind of thing that data scientists do every day. It's low cost, low infrastructure. You just have to pay people like you guys when you take the right courses. Innovative analytics, tuned to the problem at hand, is enormously better than off-the-shelf analytics, and off-the-shelf is better than nothing. Okay, so let me give you some examples. Here's my first example. How to read 1 trillion social media posts and classify deaths without physicians. Now, why would I have a title like this? Mostly because this sentence has never been uttered before in human history. Right? That's funny, by the way, even in translation. Okay, so let me tell you, this is about 2 separate projects that turn out to have the same analytical solution. And that happens a lot with data analytics. So I'll give you an example of bad analytics first. Physicians try to figure out the cause of death. In Italy, in the United States, when somebody dies, there is a death certificate. Someone signs a death certificate. A doctor sees the body and decides what someone dies of. In most of the world, people go off to the bush and are never heard from again. So they do a verbal autopsy. They ask a next of kin a list of questions about the person's symptoms. They give the symptoms to a physician. The physician tells you what the person died from. The problem is, if they give the list of symptoms to a different physician, the different physician gives you a different cause of death. It's not very useful. The physicians are useless in this context. Let me give you another example. Sentiment analysis by word counts. Okay, so you see this a lot. Twitter analysis by counting up all the words that mean a particular thing. What happens is it works a little bit, but then after a while it doesn't work so much. I was in Singapore recently, and in Singapore they were interested in what the Singaporeans were interested in, what public policies they wanted to focus on. And so take education, for example. They counted all the tweets or social media posts that used a certain word, like education, schooling, classes, books, anything related to education. And what they didn't notice, because the Olympics was going on, is the effect of the Olympics on what they were doing. And it turned out that the first Singaporean won a gold medal at the Olympics, the first time. And as it happens, Joseph Schooling's last name, right, was one of the words that they were counting. Schooling, right? So it completely blew away their analysis. Their analysis no longer made any sense. Of course, they could adjust from that, but counting words by a sentiment analysis works about as badly as the verbal autopsy where you ask the physicians. What we realized is that both problems, which seem completely unrelated, turn out to have the same solution, the same analytical solution. The key to both methods is classifying. That is, taking social media posts and putting them in categories, taking deaths and putting them in the cause of death categories. Well, that seems sort of obvious. The problem is classification, automated methods of classification, don't work very well many times. But we realized nobody cares about any one social media post. Who really cares what StatPumpkin222 says on Twitter? It doesn't matter. We don't care what anyone has to say. We only care what everyone has to say. Similarly, public health people, they don't care what any one person dies of. They only care what everybody dies of. They want to know if malaria is increasing so that they can devote public health funds in that direction. What everybody's interested in is the percent in a category, not any one thing in the category. Now, if you get all the individual posts or deaths correct, you add them up, and you get the percent in the category. There's no problem, unless your classifier isn't good, in which case those are two different things. So once we realized that these were two different things, we developed a method that didn't try to classify well. Instead, it just tried to estimate the percent in the category well. when we did, we developed these new methods, and it led to two completely unrelated things. First is a company called Crimson Hexagon, which is there, that commercialized some of the automated text analysis. They go around the world and collect all social media posts that are public, that is. I like this over here. This little phrase says, a newspaper listed Crimson Hexagon as the 7th most innovative company on the web. And I like that because the 9th most company where my brother works, Microsoft, was also listed there. So anyway, so the same method is also used to report worldwide cause of death. It takes a while, doesn't it? I'm giving the translator a run for her money. The same method is also used to estimate the prevalence of different diseases by the World Health Organization. That's the second thing here. It's the same method. In fact, it's the same computer code that understands what millions of people are saying on social media and millions of people are dying from. I'll give you a completely different example. This is a methodology we call Thresher. Does anybody speak Chinese? Anybody know what this says? Well, come on, somebody knows. Okay, anyway, that's the word freedom in Chinese. And if you use that in Chinese social media, on many but not all websites, it'll be censored. You can't use that word. Okay? What does this word mean in Chinese? It looks almost the same as the first word, so if you don't speak Chinese, you'd think, well, it's probably the same thing. If you're a computer, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But what that second word means is I field. It's completely nonsensical. It's an I and a field. It doesn't mean anything. But when people write, what they say in order to get past the censors is they say, we need more I fields in China. Try to translate that, my friend. Right? We need more I field in China. And it gets past the censors because the Chinese people are more clever than the keyword recognizer. That's called the homograph. Here's a second example. This means the harmonious society, which is the official slogan of the Chinese Communist Party. It will be censored. What does this mean? It sounds the same, actually, and it sounds like river crab. So people will say, the policy of a river crab is terrible. It sucks. Okay? And that will slip past the censors. Okay. Now, the Chinese censor by reading. They have millions of people read, and they have bad automated text analysis. We couldn't afford the first, and no reason to use the second. And this is that's called a homophone. And so they can't follow the conversation, but in order to study Chinese social media, we had to follow it by automated means. So we developed some technology to help us find these patterns in the data. And the same method, just like in the first example, the same method can do long-tail search. So only 15% of all Google searches have never been searched for before, ever. That's amazing, isn't it? Right? In order to do that kind of search, you need this kind of technology. Most analysts in governments or industry need to sit and decide what keywords to use to read things. If you choose too many, you can't follow the conversation because too much stuff overwhelms you. If you choose too little, you miss what's going on. Or language drift. 2 years ago, there was a bombing during the Boston Marathon, and we were all hunkered down in our homes, waiting for things to pass, and we would search on hashtag Boston bombings. And at some point during the day, the people of Boston got really pissed off. And they changed from hashtag Boston bombings to hashtag Boston strong. Well, if you were doing a search, you would completely miss what was going on. There's lots of other examples, same exact methodology. I'll give you another example. Computer-assisted reading. To understand what many documents, too much that we could possibly read, humans create categories. If it were your job to understand and explain to your boss 10,000 social media posts, you couldn't read them. You could only put them into, let's say, 5 categories and say, there's 5 things going on here. So most organizations impose some fixed categorization to tally customer complaints or sort reports or things like that. Here's some bad analytics, unassisted human categorization. It's time-consuming. Imagine it was your task to sort thousands and thousands of posts. It's horrible. Moreover, if you own the company or organization, you tell your workers, do not think of any new ideas, because an idea is represented in the classification. Because if you think of an idea, we're going to have to reclassify all the previous posts. So don't think of any new ideas. That seems like a bad strategy. So what we did is we came up with a method called of fully automated cluster analysis. There's many methods of there are many methods of automated cluster analysis, which will automatically take the documents and put them into categories. But those categories may not be of interest to you, because computers don't know what you want. So what we did is combine these two. We created human-led, computer-assisted technology, which is, I think, usually the best approach. Not fully automated, not fully human, but human-led, computer-assisted. So you decide what's important, but with help, and we invert the effort. You innovate as much as you can, and the computer then categorizes. Let me give you an example. So one thing that political scientists study is what elected politicians do. So some elected politicians are in the United States Congress. So what do? Okay, well, in order to figure that out, we took, or at least what do they think they do? We took 64,000 press releases from members of Congress, in which they represent what they do to their constituents. Political scientists for years have been categorizing them into three categories. Advertising, look at me, I'm a member of Congress. Position taking, look at me, I'm a liberal Democrat or conservative Republican. Or three, credit claiming, I brought this bridge to my district. So we then used this technology to look for a different categorization that conveyed something interesting and important. We first found substantive categories like foreign policy and domestic policy. Different, but not interesting. And then we found something no one had thought of before, but I think makes sense. If you look at it, you'll see it does, I think. It's called partisan taunting. Basically, how much one member of Congress will spit in the eye of the other member of Congress, all right, rather than trying to balance the budget or pass good policies. Okay? I don't know if these will resonate with you. You can try to translate this one. I think that would be really funny. Pretty much anything said by a 2016 United States presidential candidate is a partisan taunt these days. Okay, how common is this? Okay, how common is this category which political scientists had not seen before, not thought about, and not analyzed? It turns out from our methods, we found 27% of all senatorial press releases were nothing but kicking the sand in other people's eyes. So once you look at things in a different way, which must be led by the human, only the human being is going to know what's an interesting question, but assisted by the computer, they can make great progress. Okay. How about this? Here's a problem. How many students do reading assignments? Don't answer the question, your instructors are watching. Okay. How many? Research shows 20 to 30%, if you're given an assignment, do the reading. 20 to 30%. Okay. How many, even if you have to buy the book, how many buy the book? About half buy the book. So you're not really going to do the reading if you don't buy the book. Instructors can write detailed quizzes and insist that people, when they come into class, they answer the quizzes. Then the students will do the reading. But that takes an enormous amount of time. It's no fun either. So we came up with a solution called Peruse All. Peruse is an English word which means read, and all means all, so peruseall.com. So we came up with a collaborative e-reader. So you look at it on the screen and you read. The difference is we use novel data analytics to help you while you're reading, and behavioral research so that we know what you're doing and we can assist you, basically right at your elbow, helping you do the reading. With this, 90% of the students do the reading, and they understand what they read and remember it much longer. It's collaborative, and so what we do is turn solitary reading assignments into more engaging collective activities. There's intrinsic motivation because your fellow students are there at the same time, and if you have a question, you can highlight something, and other students can answer in threads and try to help you through it. There's also extrinsic motivation, which is helpful for the instructor. Your annotations can be graded based upon the quality of the annotation. better than the instructor could. We can do it automatically. It doesn't take anybody's time. And we help you. And so if you're falling behind, we'll give you little nudges so that you'll get all the credit that you deserve. Okay. So the instructors save time. Students stay engaged. We give confusion reports to the faculty, so when they walk in, they know what the students were confused on about, and they know what to focus on in class. You can try it. It's at perusal.com. We're working on it now. I'd love to have you try it and send us comments. I'm going to completely switch topics. This is one of the best things about being a data scientist. You get to study pretty much everything or anything you feel like. Okay, so reverse engineering censorship in China. The previous approach to studying censorship was to take a few posts that one person noticed was censored and spin a gigantic tale out of it. Instead, what we did is we downloaded all Chinese language social media posts from the Chinese web before the Chinese government could read and censor them. So we had the entire corpus of Chinese language social media posts that the Chinese people were not allowed to read because they couldn't read because they weren't allowed to read, but we could read. And so then we reverse engineered what they were after. We had a gigantic pile of censored posts and a gigantic pile of uncensored posts, and we used our methods of automated text analysis to try to figure out what they were after, what they were doing. About 13% are censored overall. Now, for starters, everybody knows the goal of censorship, right? It's to stop criticism and protest about the Chinese government, the state, its leaders, and their policies, right? Turns out the first thing we learned, that's completely wrong. Okay? So what is it that they were after? We looked for everything. The idea, by the way, that theory is dead once you have data, a lot of data is completely and utterly wrong also. Because you need a lens with which to look at the data. When we looked through most lenses, we didn't see anything. Until we thought to ask the question in a different way. We asked, what could be the goal? Maybe it's one of two things. Stop criticism of the state and stop collective action, that is protests or crowd formation. When we looked at it this way, the data show very, very clearly. The first is wrong, the second is right. Now, let me explain what that means. That means if I say on Chinese social media, the leaders of this town are all stealing money, here's how much, this is the overseas accounts they're putting the money in, and by the way, they all have mistresses, and here are their names, that won't be censored. But if you say, and let's go protest, that will be censored. In fact, if you say, the leaders of this town are doing such a great job, let's have a rally in their favor. That will be censored too. They don't care what you think of them. They are, after all, a bunch of dictators. What should you think of them? Right? They only care what you can do. If you have the ability to move crowds, they will stop you. Okay. The implications is that social media is actionable. For the Chinese leaders, it's actionable because they use it to measure criticism and judge local officials. They then censor to stop events with collective action potential. But if it's actionable for them, it's also actionable for us. We can use criticism and censorship to predict officials in trouble and likely to be replaced ahead of time. We can and have predicted. We can predict which dissidents they're going to arrest. We have predicted which peace treaties they're going to sign or scandals as they emerge. It's a gigantic organization designed to slow the flow of information. But it's so large it conveys a lot about the Chinese leaders. It's like an elephant tiptoeing around. It leaves big footprints, but only when studied at scale. Okay. I'll give you one more Chinese example. We're going to, so for this one, there's the Chinese 50-cent party, in which the Chinese government is rumored to fabricate, to make up social media posts, and pay people 50 cents apiece to do that. Okay, so that was what was rumored. The prevailing view of what it was that these people were doing, of activists and scholars and journalists, was that they were arguing against anyone who would criticize the government, its leaders, and their policies. That's what the 50-cent party was supposed to do. The evidence for this was a couple of anecdotes. No ground truth, no successful attempts to quantify 50-cent party, even several analyses where they made up the variable they were trying to explain and then spent the rest of the article trying to explain the variable they made up. So what did we do? Well, there existed data, but the data was complicated and very large, and no one knew how to analyze it. Same point. Big data is useless until you figure out the analytics. We developed new methods of analyzing data so that we could figure out what was going on. What did we find? We found that the prevailing view of everybody was utterly wrong. That's not what they're doing. The 50 Cent Party does not argue. They do not engage on controversial issues. By the way, we found out that they fabricate 450 million social media posts a year. 450 million. So what do? They don't argue. They don't engage on controversial issues at all. They distract. They redirect public attention from criticism and central issues to cheerleading about the regime. Like, it's a beautiful day today. I woke up thinking about how important our martyrs were to the history of China. And if you think about it, if you're having an argument with your kids or your parents or your spouse, and you want to end the argument, about the single worst thing you can do is come up with a really good counter-argument, right? Instead, what do? You say, hey, let's go get some gelato. Right? Isn't that much better? That's what the Chinese government knows. Okay. What's the consequence of all this? The consequence of all this, one interesting consequence, a side effect that isn't really talked about, is, I think, the end of the quantitative-qualitative divide. This is a divide that exists in every field. In medicine, they call it clinical-based medicine versus evidence-based medicine. In law, it's empirical research versus jurisprudence. Pretty much every field has this divide. Qualitative researchers, however, are overwhelmed by the massive amount of information pouring in. And qualitative researchers collect a massive amount of information. They need some help. It's reasonable for them to ask. Quantitative researchers also need some help. They need information. They recognize the huge amounts of information in qualitative analyses. And previously, an interview, which was remembered by the qualitative analyst, might now be videotaped or audio taped, or there might be handwritten field notes. All of these are now actionable as quantitative research. They're not useful, the analysis is not useful without the qualitative researcher, but together they're much better than either one separately. We know that when there is an expert versus, that is a qualitative expert versus modern quantitative analytics, when enough information is available, the quantitative type wins every time. Not every time, but most of the time. That's important, but that only means that certain pieces of what we do can be quantified. But you don't want to only quantify. A driverless car without a human being doesn't know where to go, and it's never going to know where to go. It might guess, right? But you don't want a driverless car that doesn't take human input. The moral of the story is fully human is no longer adequate. Just to be clear, it's you, by the way, that are inadequate. Me too, but fully automated fails also. Fully automated typically does stupid things. So you don't want fully human, and you don't want fully automated, and you don't want a fight between the two. It doesn't make any sense. When you write, you no longer write with a quill tip pen and parchment. You write with Microsoft Word or Emacs or Google Docs or something like that. What is that? That's computer-assisted writing. Computer-assisted writing. It doesn't write for you, but it helps you write. Similar kind of story. So we need computer-assisted, human-controlled technology. I encourage you all the students out there to go learn about how to provide more computer assistance to us humans, because we'll all make more progress. It's technically correct, but it's also politically much more pleasing, isn't it? Right, to say it that way? You know? But it is actually also true. Okay, so how to take advantage of big analytics rather than big data. The data is going to come in. You don't need to worry about it. Big analytics is cheap and powerful. Don't skimp on it. Okay, so if you're in an organization deciding what to analyze and how much to get, you definitely want to emphasize it. Off-the-shelf analytics will produce really big advances. If you learn how to use off-the-shelf analytics, you'll make great progress. If you learn one more step, one level up, a bit more effort, you'll be able to create innovative analytics, analytics tuned for the problem at hand, which is immensely better than off-the-shelf analytics, yet one more step above. So you also want to save it for first, not for last. The goal of most of what we do is inference. Inference, my definition of inference is using facts you know to learn about facts you don't know. That's basically what inference is. It may be that the facts you know have nothing to do with the facts you don't know, and you're in big trouble. But analytics will get you from one to the other, at least as best as humanly possible. The uncertainties in inference is not having the facts you need in order to leverage them to get to the facts you don't know. In fact, the whole field of statistics was pretty much designed to overcome data problems. If your data have screamingly clear relationships with no measurement error, well, first you need to come to Harvard and visit me so I can see your data. But if you have none of those problems, you don't need modern statistics. It'll be right there, and you'll be able to see the relationships. It's just very rare. What you want to do is build the analytics into the design, not after the fact. You don't collect the data and then go figure out how to analyze it. Figure out how to analyze it first. Avoid the problems before they occur. It saves a fortune, enormous amounts of time, opens up many more possibilities. And then the other thing, finally, is we're going to build a new discipline of data science. So data science exists within most other fields. If you take political science courses, you may take some statistics courses called political methodology. If you take economics, if you do an economics major, within economics, there'll be some courses in econometrics. If you take psychology, there'll be some courses in psychometrics. This goes on and on and on and on. If you're in biology, you can take biometrics or biological statistics or biostatistics or informatics. Pretty much every empirical field now has a subdiscipline of what we're now calling data science. Data science is the movement to connect all these subdisciplines into one unified field, and also one gigantically divided field, and that's okay. I hope you'll join me, and there's some more information on my research here. Thank you very much.